Hi, I'm Dave Frank, and I'm hosting this episode of I'm Glad I Heard That. And the desire in our heart behind this is to create content that men can listen to and watch, and at the end of it, you would be able to say, I'm really glad I heard that. Today's guest is Dr. Doug Carpenter. He is the owner of Insight Counseling Services in Auburn Hills now, Doug?
Auburn Hills.
Auburn Hills. And over the years, I've touched base with Doug from a time or two for either a referral or just to bounce something off of him. And recently, he's written a book about childhood trauma and non-alpha males, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in this podcast. And so I asked Doug if he would be willing to come on and share some of his heart and his perspective. And so I'd like to say welcome, Doug.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So let's kind of start with you personally.
Okay.
How did you, where'd you grow up, and a little bit about your childhood?
Okay. I grew up in southern Illinois. It was about 70 miles from St. Louis, in a little town called Vandalia, and it had about 5,000 people in it.
Okay.
So it was basically a farming community. My father was not a farmer. He was more of a businessman. We owned a burial and vault company. So if you had somebody in your family who died, you came through our family.
And so growing up in the rural Illinois area, at what point did you start to put, like, maybe I want to do counseling as my career in your thoughts?
Well, that came about probably in the 6th grade. And what sparked that was I noticed that there was a girl at school who would go to the lunchroom with all of us, but she never ate lunch. And I could never figure out, why is this girl not eating lunch? And so I always kind of was a kid with a soft heart and had a lot of compassion. So I tried to make friends with her, got to know her, found out the reason she wasn't eating lunch is because she didn't have the money to eat lunch. So I went home and told my mom, hey, there's this girl who comes to lunch every day. She doesn't eat because she doesn't have the money. So for the rest of the year, my mom sent double lunch money with me, and I bought this girl's lunch for the rest of the year. And in the course of that year, toward the end of the year, she shared with me that her stepfather was sexually abusing her. And so I went to the school authorities and told them that, and we ended up in a court case where she was taken away from that family and placed in a foster care with a foster family that really cared for her, took her to church, and it ended up being a really positive story. But that sparked my interest in helping people. I always say, though, that psychology chose me. I didn't choose it because I was just naturally bent that way. I think even from a little kid, to be compassionate and to see the needs of other people. And then when I got to college, I would sit through psychology classes and, like, the lights would just go off. Everything would make sense. I would remember all the material. Then I'd go to math and I'd sit there like drooling, like I don't even know what's going on. So I always say psychology chose me. I didn't choose it.
So kind of what got me interested in talking with you is I remember you talking about writing a book a couple of years ago, and then it finally got released.
Yes.
The book is called Childhood Trauma and the Non-Alpha Male. And boy, if that title doesn't get you excited. But knowing you and so forth, I said, okay, I want to read about this, and I want to kind of get into it. And after reading it, that's when I started to reach out to you and say, hey, could we talk about this?
Sure.
So, first of all, why did you want to write this book?
Well, I believe that there's many more men in our society that fall into the category of being a non-alpha male, and the research backs that up, than an alpha male. If you look at the definition of an alpha male, or what society has told us an alpha male is, it's that, you're into cars, you're into sports, you're into rough and rugged activities. Well, a certain percentage of men are that, or even if you're in high school, there's a certain percentage of students who fall in the jock category, and they're usually considered the alpha male category. But in today's world, especially with computer science, there are a lot of kids who aren't going that more alpha male, road, and having those activities and those interests and those likes. And so the non-alpha categories seem to be growing, but yet What I saw through counseling and what I even experienced in my own life is that if you don't fit this category, then where do you fit as a non-alpha male? I know in my own life, as a young person, like I said, I was a fairly sensitive kid. I was pretty engaged and in tuned with the needs of other people. And I had a leg injury as a kid that prevented me from playing sports. So I couldn't go that route. And that's where I started learning to play the piano, because I had to stay inside and learn how to do something inside. Okay. So then that took me into, my world of being even more involved with the church and the music, and so, which is another kind of it's a non-alpha male role if you're involved in music and art and things like that. So, I think that there was a struggle there for even myself to find that sense of masculinity. How do I balance this world out and what it's telling me? And I had very little guidance from my father. My father was very present, and he was a great provider. Couldn't ask for a better provider. However, he was completely uninvolved in our lives. And I talk about this at the end of the book, which I didn't know this until I was 22. Well, I knew it to some degree, but not to the extent that he shared it. My father was raised by a very abusive father.
Yeah.
And I knew that my grandfather was somewhat abusive. He had done some things to me that my parents really came unglued about. My mom even physically attacked him one time when he threw me in a dog pen with a dog, and he threw a live possum in the dog pen with me. And he stood there and laughed as the possum and the dog went crazy at one another. And so my mom heard me screaming bloody murder, come running out of the house, and I'm standing on top of the dog house.
Yeah.
Just petrified. I'm like 5.
Yeah.
So she just come and jumped on his back and was just railing on him to get me out of there. So, that's the kind of stuff my grandfather would do. And so my dad vowed that when he had kids that he was not going to do anything with them. He was just going to let them play and let them be kids, because he never got to be a kid. So I grow up in this environment where my mom pays all this attention to me, teaches me how to do things. Like I can cook and do laundry. By 10 years old, I knew how to cook. I knew how to start the washing machine, because these were things she was teaching me. But my dad was completely absent.
Yeah.
He was there, breathing, but he was completely absent as far as teaching me anything or spending time with me. Or, our church had a ball team, and I would go watch the games, and all these kids would be there with their dads. All the boys would be there with their dad, and I was there alone. My dad didn't participate in stuff like that. And so I felt lost in a lot of ways of, where do I learn how to become a man? Where do I get my sense of masculinity? Because it's not being imparted to me. It's not being shown. It's not being modeled. But it wasn't until age 22 where he sat down and said, this is how I grew up. This is what your grandfather did to me. And so my approach in life was to leave you kids alone so you could be a kid, so you could play. But you're 22 years old now, and we have no relationship. It seems like you hate me. You don't want to be around me. And this isn't at all what I wanted or what I had in my head. I did this to protect you. And instead, I ended up really hurting you. And that day, he asked me for forgiveness and asked me if I would be willing to try to build a relationship with him.
You think about a guy like that, how far he moved the ball down the field, right? By doing that. And it's like this idea to ask your kid for forgiveness, like the amount of humility.
Yes.
And also, like, I just hear this guy screaming, I want to have a relationship with you. And I think about, how God uses that story for you, what you experienced. And when you're in a counseling relationship with someone, and because that story is getting played out a million times,
absolutely,
in our lives, right? And I think about you learning from that experience, and also kind of more importantly, thank God your dad said something to you about like what his childhood was like.
Oh yeah,
right? Because perspective gets to change and grow and all those things. And it's like, and for you to be able to take that hurt and that trauma and now use it in a way to help other people deal with their hurt. It's like,
Yeah.
that's pretty fantastic. So in the book, one of the things that I want to talk about, there's just a couple sections I want to go
Sure.
through with you, because it's very rarely that you get to talk to the author in person here. But on page 50, this is a quote you said, "I once heard a statement that I often use in therapy. The only difference between a rut and a grave is how long you decide to stay there. I firmly believe this. Our hurts, habits, and hang-ups only have to be temporary ruts. They don't have to become our graves. We do not have to live in a lifetime of deep pain. Trauma can be dealt with and resolved." And so when I was prepping and reading through this, I hit this section of the book, and that spoke hope to me. Because I think about people I care about, and I think about people in my life who have gone through things that I'm not even going to say I can imagine what that feels like, right?
Right.
Just difficult things. But to know that that doesn't have to be a grave, that it can be a rut. And so as you do this in your practice, and as you see people come in with trauma, and I can imagine in 30 years of talking with people, the things that you have heard.
Right.
What is it like to watch someone walk in and be in trauma and think that's going to define them the rest of their life, and watch them learn how to gain tools, deal with it, and so forth, and start to pop their head up and look out and go, oh, I can have a life. What's that like for you to lead people through that process?
Oh, it's extremely rewarding. I see it as ministry. I don't just see it as a profession or a job. It's truly taking hope to a person and offering it to them. Another phrase that I use in the book is, we're only as sick as our secrets. And I think that originally comes from AA. And sometimes that's just what people need. They've never told their secrets. They've never told the pain that they're carrying. And so, yeah, it's going to become their grave.
So let's kind of move on and talk a little bit about shame, because there's a
Sure.
case study that we're going to reference here in a minute I want to talk about. But shame, how does it physically and psychologically impact and manifest in people? What are some of the signs of this?
Oftentimes when things come up with a deficit or harm, you tend to then bring it home to you and think, well, it's because of me. There's something I did or didn't do that caused a person to react this way. And then shame can actually become what we call toxic shame, where you truly believe that you are inherently bad.
Yeah.
And we all have some degree of shame. And shame's not a bad thing. Shame, just like guilt, can be used to help formulate and shape our behaviors to be a good citizen. But it's when shame becomes to a level where you put that on like a piece of clothing, like it's who you are. Like you feel like you're wearing a t-shirt that says, I'm bad, I'm damaged goods, I'm whatever the negative phrase that you might have.
The case study you talk about is a guy by the name of Gary, and very alpha male, and he's pushing his two sons to go into this direction of alpha male sports. A lot of discipline, a lot of I'm going to talk to you because you screwed up, and that's really the only reason I'm talking to you, because you got to get better, right?
Right.
And so one of the things I was kind of wondering is, as a parent, what are some things that we as parents can do that can unintentionally communicate shame?
Well, the biggest thing is and I see this all the time, when parents have childhood wishes of their own that were never realized, and then they put them on their children.
Okay.
Like, I wanted to be the star basketball player, but I never could get there, so I want you to do that. You need to be this. And they may not even verbally say that, but they unconsciously communicate it to their child, or they may drive their child to practice more, or rail on them after the basketball game for all the mistakes they made versus all the good plays that they did. So when a parent takes their own unrealized wishes and dreams and places them on a child, that's very difficult. I use another example in the book here, where a family came over here from a foreign country. The dad was a doctor. He expected the kids to all be doctors, and that's the way that they would achieve success here in America. Well, this kid did not want to be a doctor, but here he is in med school, in college, and he's failing out. He's depressed beyond belief because he's not being true to who he is. He's trying to live the father's expectations. It's your job as a parent to get to know your child and their interest. So, for example, it's really kind of funny that I'm the way I am, but my son is as alpha male as you can get. He hunts, he fishes, he'll kill anything that moves. You know, he plays every sport known to man, was on teams.
All right, so you get to know your kid,
Absolutely.
Right? Like, this is one of the things you're talking about. You get to know your kid. Piano playing psychologist, you know, and now how did you nurture that? Because that is not even on your spectrum.
It's
right?
not even on my spectrum. So,
so
that was difficult to some degree. Number one, I praised him. I praised him for all those things. I went to every one of his games. I absolutely abhor football. But he was on the football team. And I went and sat through the freezing rain and the snow and cursed under my breath the whole time I was there. You know, and hated it, but I praised him. You know, he would get in the car and I would tell him how good of a job he did. I would tell him, you know, you like a lot of things that daddy doesn't like at all, but that's okay. I want you to find out what you want to do, and I want you to do it with all your heart.
Okay.
Because you don't have to like the things I like.
Okay, so then did you go on YouTube and learn how to gut an animal after you kill it, or did you hand some of this off to other men?
No, so that was going to be my next point is I made sure that he had the appropriate mentors in his life.
Yeah.
So our youth pastor and his father-in-law are big-time hunters. They were men I could trust.
Yeah.
I knew them well, and so they took my son under their wing and took him hunting, took him fishing, and the things that I really couldn't do. I mean, I could go with him. Like the first time he laughs at me because I say that all the time. He didn't catch his turkey.
Right.
He shot a turkey at 12 years old. That was probably, and a deer. He got a deer and a turkey in the same year at 12 years old. I was with him sitting in the blind with the older mentor that I had set him up with, and he shot the turkey and got it, and I was there and I was happy and I helped him carry it out of the woods and all that. But I sat there reading a book in the blind, and I had a McDonald's sweet tea.
Right.
So this is me in the blind, thinking,
Were you wearing your blazer?
And no, I had camo on,
okay.
and I was like, okay, I'm just going to sit here until this is over. I'm just going to keep reading this book, and you can't talk because you'll scare away, you know, the prey, all that. So, and then, you know, he finally got it, and we all celebrated and everything. But I was there for that. But, you know, I would tell him, this just isn't Dad's thing, and I can't teach you how to do this.
You know, and that's with men for us, because again, my childhood experience, again, not having a dad who's super involved, the men of the church, you know, that I grew up in here, you know, I had this buffet. You know, guys who were very good executives who really understood the technical world really well. Heavy guys who, you know, do the car thing, and guys who do the hunting thing and so forth. And so that was helpful for me. I could kind of, you know, go through that buffet line and go, oh yeah, you know, this is good. But for a guy to know that, like, you don't have to be good at all these things, because I think about, like,
not at all.
You know, eventually you'll die, right? And you know,
right.
And your son, what he's going to remember in this moment is like, my dad didn't know how to do those things. He figured out how to do it for me, and then he just hung with me while I did it.
Right.
And he's going to know you were miserable because you'll tell him.
Oh, he does.
Right.
We laugh about it.
Yeah. But like, oh my gosh, what a memory. That's how much my dad
Well,
cares.
because we were sitting in the blind, and when the turkey was coming up, I was so enthralled in watching him, the book fell through my legs, and they both turned around and looked at me like, I'm going to kill you, because I was making noise.
Yeah. You know, and this is the, you know, you talk about identifying your kids' interests, and, you know, from one of the stories Jesus talks about, you know, in the parable son, you know, which is one of the most taught things, you know, probably in the Christian church, because it just oozes grace and it flips the script on everything in life. But, you know, what you see is you see a father who goes to his son. he runs to his son. Like
Right.
that's a significant thing because of the Middle Eastern culture and all those different things going on. But you see a father who goes to his kid, not says, you come here, right? And so you find out who your kid is and you go to them. Kind of one of the last things that I read in the book, and this is, like I said, I didn't finish it, but I'm definitely going to read those 25 tips for parents now, because
and that's in there. That's in the 25 tips that find out what your child likes and
because right now as a parent, I'm doing small T trauma to my kids, and I'm trying to move it from being a big T trauma. So I'll read that. But you talk about men. And a person by the name of Griffin, I forget his first name here, he proposes this. Who is Griffin, real quick?
Dan Griffin. He's a sociologist out of L.A.
Okay. And so he proposes man rules. And this is what he says. It says, don't be weak. Don't show emotion. Don't ask for help. Don't cry. And don't care about relationships. And when I read that, I go, true. And how's that working out for you? Those were the two thoughts I had at the same time.
Not well. That you hear this term flying around now called toxic masculinity.
Yes.
And, some people balk at that term. I think those things that you just read there are signs of toxic masculinity. Because we live in a society where boys are taught those things. Don't cry. Don't be weak. You as a parent have to counteract those negative messages that society is giving you. And one way I did that is, for example, when my son Dawson, I remember one time he got hurt doing something. And I simply picked him up, put him in my lap, and said, you know what? It is okay to cry. And I'm just going to sit here and hold you until you're done crying. And then you can get up and go play. But Dad will sit here as long as we need to, and you can cry until the pain goes away.
Okay.
So that's a very different response than suck it up, be a man, whatever message.
It's not that bad.
Yeah, it's not that bad. You're going to live, go cry to your mother. Some of this stuff that alpha males kind of tend to adhere to. The more alpha male culture tends to adhere to some of those what I would consider toxic masculinity belief systems that either lead to shame or lead to some of these physical problems because you're not dealing with the emotional material that you're holding. So I think these messages that we send boys is very toxic for their overall emotional development, and especially for their emotional development in context of other relationships, and especially with a relationship with a spouse.
And I think about how hard it would be for a guy to realize, probably back to what your dad experienced, which is, I am not where I want to be. I'm going to eat some humble pie. I'm going to ask for forgiveness, and I'm going to ask for it to go in a different direction. And how many men aren't ever going to pony up and take that step, even though that's probably what they need to do the most?
There's no shame in admitting your mistakes. To me, that is a part of being a true man, that you have enough masculinity and strength within you to say, look, I messed up. I did this wrong. I need to ask for forgiveness. I need to apologize to you. I want to build a better relationship with you. That takes a lot of strength and courage, and that's what we need to model to children, is the strength and courage. Just like you use the word provider, so many men, we know how to be good providers. We know how to go to work. We know how to work 40 hours a week or more and bring home a good paycheck. But you need to broaden that definition of being a provider. It's not just monetarily. You have to provide an emotionally rich and healthy atmosphere and dynamic with each one of your children, no matter how different they might be. It's your job to provide an emotionally rich environment for them to flourish, not just provide for their monetary needs.
But one of the things that my dad did really well is he owned it. And he said, he would say things like, I know I wasn't a perfect dad, or I'm really sorry, and different things like that. And so even though there's hurt,
Yes.
right? And we dealt with it. Man, I knew where his heart was at, and so
Right.
like when we buried my dad, we could celebrate his life,
Right.
even though all of us as kids had to figure out how to navigate a weird relationship with him. And I look at it and just go, thank you, Jesus. You know, like
Absolutely.
that's where we got to end that part of this with. And then him and I will be in heaven, and the rest of it we get to work out up there, right?
Right, right.
You know, and it's just like, like you said, there is no shame in admitting mistakes. And as a guy, that's kind of where you're at, and like that's the most intimidating thing you're dealing with right now. I just want to encourage you to think about it and pray to Jesus to give you the strength to do that, because that could be the start of healing, of a changed relationship, and different things like that. And so I want to say thanks for stopping by and for sharing.
You're welcome.
And finally, one more time, the book is called Childhood Trauma and the Non-Alpha Male, Gender Role Conflict, Toxic Shame, and Complex Trauma, Finding Hope, Clarity, Healing, and Change. And I got to tell you, if we lived in the days when people used to come over to your house, we don't do that anymore, and you had this on your coffee table, I'm sure that'd be some great discussions.
Yes.
It'd be like, you know, at your next wine party, be like, oh, I've been reading this. Would you guys like to talk about what I've learned? Doug's been kind enough to give us of his time with us today, but he also wants to give out 3 free copies of this book. So we're going to drop Doug's email into the comments section on the YouTube. And if you want to be one of the first 3 people to email Doug, you'd send him your name and your mail-in address, and he'd respond by sending you a book. So Doug, thanks so much for being willing to do that.
Thank you.
Spend time with that. If you like what you heard today on YouTube, if you could smash that subscribe button, smash that like button, and also subscribe to our channel, that would be greatly appreciated. And the extended format and everything that we talked about is going to be on our podcast. Again, that's the I'm Glad I Heard That podcast, available on Apple, Google Play, and all the different podcasting platforms. Thanks so much for stopping by and giving us of your time. Have a great day.